Tonight's story is about Emily Grace, a quiet black woman with a silenced past, a buried gift, and a name no nunca pen so can hear. 4 years, she moved like a shadow through the marble halls of billionaire Daniel Hawthorne's mansion, cleaning silver she'd never use, setting tables she'd never sit at. No one really saw her. No one, except the grand piano she wiped clean each morning, and the way her fingers lingered on the keys like they remembered something the world tried to make her forget. What no one knew was that Emily came from music. Not the kind taught in fancy schools, but the kind passed down in kitchens and porches. She grew up on spirituals, on jazz, on the hum of her grandmother's voice, music that carried both sorrow and survival. She had once been called a prodigy. But talent, in her world, was rarely nurtured, just admired from a distance, then ignored. Until one night, in front of 200 powerful guests, Daniel Hawthorne decided to make her part of the entertainment. An example, as he put it, of how even the help could surprise you. But what he saw as a spectacle became a reckoning. Because when Emily Grace sat at that piano, she didn't just play notes. She played memory. She played defiance. She played every no she had ever swallowed. And the music didn't just silence the room. It broke hearts. It woke something in people that had been sleeping far too long. This is a story about a voice buried by silence. About a culture dismissed, a woman underestimated, and a gift that refused to die quietly. This is the sound she hid. If you believe that stories have the power to heal, if you've ever felt invisible in a room full of noise, you're exactly where you need to be. And tonight, a woman the world never saw will show them exactly who she is. She never touched the keys. Not really. Every morning, before the mansion stirred, before the white uniforms of the kitchen staff bustled to life, Emily Grace would push her cleaning cart into the grand music room. Rubber gloves, silence, and a rhythm in her soul passed down like an heirloom. The piano sat in the center like a monument. A black Steinway D, polished, perfect, untouched by music, but gleaming like something sacred. Emily cleaned it with a gentleness reserved for memories. Her hands hovered above the keys like they were family she hadn't seen in years. She knew the feel of ivory, the give beneath each press. Her fingers remembered things she no longer let herself play. But she didn't sit. She didn't press a single note. Because where she came from, surviving came before dreaming. And this place, this room, wasn't built for her song. That part of her was locked away. For safekeeping. For protection. From the upstairs balcony, Daniel Hawthorne sometimes watched. The richest man in the city. Investor. Collector. Power in a tailored suit. He stood with his imported espresso and an expression caught between amusement and entitlement, watching her like one might watch a painting that moved. "So strange," he once murmured. "Why admire something you'll never be allowed to use?" He never asked her name. Never asked where she learned to move like music was stitched into her skin. She was the help. A detail. Until one Tuesday morning, he appeared in the doorway and broke the pattern. "You really love that thing, don't you?" Emily froze, turned slowly, eyes wide, heart stilled. "Sir." Daniel walked in, circling the piano like it was a prop in his personal theater. "Every day, I see you in here, wiping it like it's holy." She swallowed. Softly. "It's part of my job, Mr. Hawthorne." He smirked, the kind of smirk men wear when they think they've uncovered something rare, and believe it belongs to them. "Sure. But you treat it like it's more than furniture." She said nothing. Because every black woman knows when silence is safer than truth. Daniel stared at her a moment longer. Not with curiosity. Not with kindness. With possession. Then he turned and left, already bored with the thing he didn't understand. Emily stood there, still as a statue. Her heart thundered. He had noticed. Not her music. Her longing. And that scared her more than anything else. And just like that, days turned into hours. Hours into minutes. And the night of the gala arrived. The Hawthorne estate had never looked more alive. Crystal chandeliers blazed like constellacos. The string quartet rehearsed scales that no one would truly listen to. Chefs barked in French behind swinging doors that kept the heat and chaos out of sight. Outside, a red carpet unraveled over old stone, cushioning the tires of imported cars and the stilettos of women in gowns so sharp they looked like armor. Inside, everything gleamed. Every glass, spotless. Every flower, posed. Every detail, perfect. Except the reason behind it all. Daniel Hawthorne, the host of the night, moved through his home like a man staging a performance. The glasses go there. Not there. Do I have to do everything myself? His voice cut through the air like a knife wrapped in cashmere. To the waiters, cold. To the florists, impatient. To his guests, charm personified. As the first guest, a banking magnate from Geneva, crossed the threshold, Daniel's entire being shifted. Smile, on. Posture, precise. Words, rehearsed to sound effortless. "Henry, my friend," he said with a handshake that lasted just a second too long. "Welcome to our little evening." He was a man who understood exactly how much kindness cost, and only spent it when the return was guaranteed. Around him, the air crackled with wealth and power. Senators, CEOs, old money, new greed, and every single one walked through that door expecting to be dazzled. Emily, meanwhile, moved through the corridors like a quiet current. Uniform pressed, hair pulled back, tray steady in hand. She carried crystal flutes and folded napkins like she was invisible. Because to them, she was. No one asked her name. No one looked her in the eye. She was part of the architecture. Except Daniel. He saw her pass near the music room, that same quiet gaze she always wore around the piano. And that's when it came to him. Not a kind idea. A clever one. A spark of cruelty, dressed in silk and vintage wine. Tonight, he thought, swirling his glass, my guests will have a little entertainment. He called for one of his assistants. Send Grace to me, he said casually. The one who cleans the piano. He said it as if she were a prop. A surprise trick. A novelty no one expected. But his eyes already saw the scene. A black maid at a grand piano. A room full of rich white applause. Deep within the house, her name echoed down the hallway. Emily turned, tray in hand, her breath catching. She didn't know why she was being summoned, but she could feel it. Something wasn't right. Something was about to shift. Not gently, but like the beginning of a storm. The ballroom glowed. Golden light, crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished to perfection, each one reflecting shoes worth more than Emily Grace had ever held in her hand. The room pulsed with champagne, ego, and the kind of laughter that only echoes when power feels safe. Waiters moved like ghosts. Musicians played soft jazz in the corner, ignored but essential, like background music in a movie made for people who'd never be cast. At the center of it all stood Daniel Hawthorne. Glass raised. Smile engineered. Confidence carved from inherited wealth. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice slicing through the hum of conversation like a blade dressed in velvet. I trust the food has pleased you, and the wine loosened your generosity. Laughter. Predictable. Hollow. A few claps, well-trained hands obeying the social script. Then, his eyes found her. By the service entrance. Head down. Tray in hand. Still invisible. Until he made her visible, on his terms. Before we continue, he said, tone shifting to something that pretended to be spontaneous, I'd like to offer a little surprise. Heads turned. Brows raised. Emily froze. Some of you may have noticed how well kept our beautiful grand piano is, he continued, gesturing toward the Steinway, centerpiece and ornament. That's thanks to a special member of our staff, someone with a hidden talent. Gasps of polite intrigue. Emily Grace, he called, eyes locked on her. Would you come here, please? The room quieted, but not kindly. Her feet wouldn't move. Her heart was a drum. Her palms, slick with sweat. She looked to the others, staff who had learned the same code she knew. When the powerful point, you step forward. Even if it's toward a cliff. Slowly, she moved. Every step weighed 1,000 judgments. Every gaze assumed something she hadn't said. Daniel gestured to the bench like a throne handed to a servant for show. You've admired it long enough, haven't you? He said, just loud enough for her to hear. Go on. Play something. She opened her mouth. Sir, I. Don't be shy, he interrupted, turning back to the crowd. I'm told she has quite the touch. The room chuckled. Not cruelly, but not kindly either. The kind of laugh that says, let's see what the maid can do. Emily stood before the piano. Not like a performer. Like a woman staring down something holy and dangerous. Her hands trembled. She hadn't played since, before the silence, before the grief, before the belief that her music was not for rooms like this. The room held its breath. Daniel sipped his wine, sure he'd orchestrated a charming interlude. But Emily sat down. She placed her hands just above the keys, then closed her eyes. And for a moment, nothing. Not silence from fear. Silence from power. The kind of silence born when a soul prepares to speak. Then her fingers moved. Not nervously. Not like someone performing. But like someone unlocking a door passed down from her grandmother's hands. Hands that sang in kitchens, in churches, in cotton fields, in jazz clubs that no one rich ever entered. The first chord rang out. Low. Wounded. Honest. It wasn't polished. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to reclaim. A fork paused mid-air. A woman stopped mid-sip. The quartet in the corner lowered their instruments, stunned. Emily's hands danced with memory. Each phrase carried something buried. Grief. Hope. Longing. Rage. Not loud, but present. Controlled. Rising like smoke. The room didn't just listen. It remembered. Daniel stood behind her, stunned. What had started as a joke was turning into something else. Something threatening. He could feel the air shift. Like the house itself was waking up. Margaret Langley, a concert pianist, revered and retired, leaned forward, her fingers trembling. She whispered, almost in prayer. That's not talent. That's truth. Emily's eyes remained closed. But her posture changed. Shoulders eased. Back lifted. And in that moment, in a room full of people who'd never looked her in the eye, she became who she had always been. Not the maid. Not the help. Not a novelty. A musician. A force. A legacy reborn. The final note hung in the air like a testimony. No one moved. No one dared. Then, one clap. Then, another. And then a rising wave, not applause, but release. Some stood. Some cried and didn't understand why. Margaret pushed forward, tears falling freely. "Who taught you to play like that?" she asked. Emily opened her eyes. "No one," she said. "I just remembered." Daniel didn't move. Couldn't. His event had been hijacked. Not by rebellion, but by truth. And now, every eye was on her. Not the girl who cleaned their glasses. Not the woman with dust on her hands. But the one who made them feel. In a way money never could. The applause echoed through the marble halls like aftershocks. Emily had already stepped away from the piano, but the energy hadn't left the room. Not the sound. Not the shift. She stood to the side, eyes lowered, shoulders still tense, as the same people who hadn't seen her all night now leaned toward her like moths to flame. The same mouths that gave her instructions now asked questions they'd never cared to know the answers to. Who is she? Where did she learn that? Why is she cleaning floors? No one asked that at the start of the evening. They only looked when she became undeniable. Margaret Langley reached out and gently took Emily's hands, still trembling, still sacred. "That wasn't performance," she whispered. "That was resurrection." Emily blinked. Her lips parted. But no words came. Because what do you say when your silence finally makes the room listen? Words suddenly felt small, unfit to carry what she had just released. From across the room, Daniel Hawthorne stood watching. He didn't smile. Couldn't. The men who once orbited him were now huddled around her. The women who once praised his collections now held Emily's hands like they were relics. His gala, his display of dominance, charm, control, had been eclipsed by a woman the room was never supposed to see. "Why didn't you say you had a pianist like this working here?" someone asked him. Another, chuckling. "If she worked for me, she'd be playing Carnegie, not clearing crystal." Daniel forced a smile. "Well, she's full of surprises, isn't she?" But inside, he was unraveling. Because the story was no longer his. And he didn't know how to rewrite it. Emily quietly excused herself and slipped through a side door, back into the hush of the hallway. Her chest tightened. Her legs trembled. It had happened. She had played. They had listened. But now, what did it mean? She stood alone, bracing herself against the stillness. Then, a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be hiding." She turned. Margaret. Her presence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You have something rare, Emily. Something raw. Something this world doesn't even realize it's starving for." Emily's throat tightened. "I'm just a maid." Margaret shook her head. Not with pity, but clarity. "No. That's just the role they handed you. It doesn't mean you have to keep wearing it." And then, a staff member cracked open the ballroom doors. "They're asking for you again." Emily flinched. A familiar reflex. I should get back to work." Margaret's voice was calm, but firm. "No. You should get back to music." From deeper in the corridor, Daniel watched. Again. But this time, not with pride. Not with ownership. Not with amusement. With fear. Because for the first time, his control wasn't the loudest thing in the room. The morning after the gala, the Hawthorne estate was quiet again. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt like order, it felt like aftershock. In the kitchen, voices dropped to whispers when Emily walked past. Not mocking, not kind, just uncertain, like the house was recalibrating itself around her presence. The house manager stared longer than usual. The chauffeur, who barely nodded on most days, offered her something close to respect. And there, on the long mahogany dining table, surrounded by untouched croissants and silver that gleamed, lay a newspaper. Not about politics. Not the stock market. Her. The Maid Who Played Like a Master. By Margaret Langley. Her name. Her story. Her music. The final line read, "What the world witnessed last night wasn't just music. It was the reawakening of a soul buried by silence." Emily stood frozen, the ink staining her fingertips. She felt exposed, not flattered, not proud. Seen in a way that didn't feel safe. Not after years of being trained to disappear. To make herself small, quiet, obedient, invisible. Now, suddenly, the world was watching. But watching didn't mean understanding. It often meant possession. By noon, the phone started ringing. Margaret had quietly passed along Emily's name, to orchestras, agents, producers. The calls came quickly. "We'd love to have her play at our spring gala. Does she have any original work? We're holding auditions next month. She could be exactly what we need." What we need. As if her voice now belonged to them. Emily sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the attic. The same room where she'd taught herself to shrink. She looked down at her hands. Hands that had scrubbed staircases, polished silver, folded sheets. Now they were being called rare, brilliant, divine. But applause doesn't dissolve fear. And attention isn't always safety. She didn't know who she was outside these walls. She had no savings. No family. No map. Just a single night. A single song. And the question echoing through her mind. Was it real? Or was it a fluke? Later that day, Daniel called her to his study. His voice was softer than usual, but not kind. Just cautious. "You've stirred things up," he said, pouring himself whiskey he didn't drink. "A half-dozen men have asked why someone who plays like you is folding my laundry." Emily said nothing. "You made me look like a fool." She looked up, calm now. "I didn't ask to be seen, Mr. Hawthorne. You put me in the spotlight. I just didn't let you write the ending." He didn't reply. For the first time in their years under the same roof, he didn't know what to say. After a long pause, he asked, "What are you going to do now?" Emily exhaled. She looked around the room where she'd always stood in the background. Then answered, steady and sure, "I think I'm done cleaning your piano." The suitcase wasn't heavy. Emily had never owned much. Just a few blouses, some faded sheet music, and an old photo of her mother holding her hand beside a piano that no longer existed. But as she zipped it closed, it felt like she was packing away a version of herself she no longer needed. The version that had been taught to stay small. The attic room, once a quiet refuge, now looked like a cage. 3 years of silence. 3 years of erasing herself behind other people's lives. 3 years of cleaning for people who never even spoke her name. Now, she was walking out. Margaret Langley met her at the gates in a black town car. "You came," Margaret said, her voice full of something gentle but certain. Emily nodded. "I don't know where this leads," she whispered. Margaret smiled, not with answers, but with truth. That's the best kind of beginning. The city looked different through the car window. Louder, brighter. But this time, it didn't feel like it was swallowing her. For the first time, Emily didn't feel like part of the background. She felt real. The rehearsal hall was still when they arrived, a vast, echoing space. Rows of empty chairs. A single concert grand at center stage. And quiet, the kind that demanded courage. Emily stepped forward, breath caught in her throat. "They're expecting you," Margaret said softly. Emily nodded and walked toward the piano. Each footfall echoed across the stage like a question she was finally ready to answer. At the far end of the room, a small group of musicians and staff waited. Among them, Maestro Renard, a sharp-eyed French conductor known for his brilliance and his brutality. He didn't rise, didn't smile. "So," he said, voice dry, skeptical, "let's see if you're a story or a fluke." Emily didn't flinch. She wasn't here to prove herself to men like him. She wasn't here to fit into a narrative someone else had written. She was here to tell the truth. Not with words, but in the language that had always been hers. She sat at the piano, took a breath, and didn't play Bach, didn't play Chopin. She played something no one had ever heard before. Her own composition. The melody began like a heartbeat, slow, careful, waking from years of sleep. Then another note. Then movement. Then memory. It told of dust, of cold rooms, of locked doors, of hands trained to clean instead of create. It told of silence, and how silence, when stretched long enough, doesn't vanish. It becomes a scream. But Emily's scream was not violent. It was graceful, controlled, fierce. A kind of beauty no one in that room had expected, because they hadn't expected her. But the scream wasn't angry. It wasn't chaos. It was clarity. It was freedom. It was her. When she finished, the rehearsal hall fell completely silent. Maestro Renard leaned back in his chair, hands clasped in front of his mouth. Not in judgment, but in surrender. "You wrote that?" he asked, voice quieter now. Emily nodded. "Once." He exhaled slowly. "Then I hope you're free next season. Because we have a stage, and it's been waiting for you." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience like velvet. And for a moment, time held its breath. Emily stood just behind the curtain, hands folded, heart steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was ready. Months had passed since the gala, since the moment her silence cracked open, in front of 200 strangers, and let a lifetime of music escape. She was no longer the maid who surprised everyone. She was Emily Grace, composer, storyteller, witness, voice. From the wings, she peeked at the front rows. There was Margaret Langley, not proud like a mentor, but quiet like someone who had simply helped open a door that never should have been locked. There were critics, reporters with notebooks ready, musicians, patrons, people who once didn't look twice at women like her, now leaning forward. And him, Daniel Hawthorne, third row, alone, smaller than before. When their eyes met, just for a moment, he didn't look away, didn't smirk, didn't try to reclaim the story. He just nodded, and for once, that was enough. Emily stepped into the light. The applause began before she reached the bench. But she didn't bow. Not yet. She walked slowly to the piano. not rushing to prove anything. She sat, closed her eyes, and listened, not to the room, but to the silence inside her. That was finally hers to shape. Then, she played, not to impress, not to redeem, not to erase the years she'd lost. She played because this was the one place where the world couldn't interrupt her truth. Because she had waited a lifetime to become this sound. The music unfolded like pages from a book only she could write. Notes that wept for everything that had been taken. Harmonies that healed for everything she had reclaimed. And silence, the kind that once hid her, now resting gently between each phrase, like breath. When the final chord faded, the theater didn't move. No cough, no shuffle, just stillness, like no one wanted to be the first to return to earth. Then someone stood, then another, and then everyone, not for a spectacle, not for a miracle, but for a woman who turned dust and silence into a voice the world would never forget. Daniel didn't clap at first. He just watched her, and in that moment, he looked less like a man undone, and more like someone who had finally understood. He was never the main character. Then, slowly, he brought his hands together, once, twice, and kept clapping, as if it were the only honest thing he could do. Backstage, Margaret was waiting. She opened her arms, and Emily let herself be held. "You've become what you were always meant to be," she said. Emily smiled. "No," she whispered. "I've only just begun." End of story. Beginning of everything. Sometimes, the people the world overlooks carry the deepest beauty, and sometimes, silence isn't emptiness. It's just a song waiting for the right moment, and the right courage to be heard. Never underestimate quiet souls, especially the ones history tried to silence. They might be the very people who end up moving the world once they finally find their voice. If this story moved you, even just a little, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Every day, we share real, emotional stories like this. Stories that remind us what it means to survive, to reclaim, to rise, and to become. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because tomorrow, a new story will be waiting to meet your heart exactly where it is. And we'd be honored to have you here when it does.